The DJ was halfway through some synth-heavy remix of a Whitney Houston song when the champagne flute slipped from her hand and shattered against the polished floor. People turned their heads. She didn't notice. Celia just stood there, mouth parted, lipstick smudged, one heel slightly twisted like she'd forgotten how to stand upright. All eyes weren't on the music anymore. They were on us. On me. And Mira. Let's rewind. Just a few days. No, scratch that. Let's rewind to table 9. That's where it actually began. Not the affair. That came later. The plan began at table 9, in the dusty corner of a Polish-American community center during a Tuesday bingo night. Where the coffee is always burnt, the air smells like linoleum and mothballs, and the only thing colder than the room is the way Mira said, "You want to break them without saying a single word?" I didn't answer right away. I was still trying to believe what I'd seen on my wife's phone 3 hours earlier. A photo. A video. Her laugh. Her hand on his chest. A voice note with her whispering, "You make me feel alive, Terrence." I felt dead. Mira just sipped her tea, watching me like a hawk that had spotted another broken-winged bird. Her eyes didn't flinch. Her blouse was buttoned too tight at the neck like she didn't want to give anyone anything, not even air. I admired that. She looked like the kind of woman who kept receipts, emotional and otherwise. "I'm not looking for revenge," I finally muttered. "That's cute," she replied. "But you showed up." Touché. We talked, and somewhere between stale biscotti and round 5 of bingo, the plan formed. It was quiet. It was clean. It was nuclear. Terrence, her husband. Celia, my wife. They were supposed to be at the annual Horizon Consulting Gala. Fancy event, open bar, plus one's encouraged. Celia had been going on about it for weeks, describing the venue in such over-the-top detail. It was almost like she was trying to sell me a ticket to her fantasy life. So I decided to give her a front-row seat to mine. The night of the party, Mira picked me up in a blue rental Audi. Not because she didn't have a car, because we didn't want them recognizing the vehicles. She wore a deep burgundy dress with sleeves that looked like they could slice through air. I wore the only suit that still fit me since the pandemic wait. We didn't say much on the ride over. There was nothing left to say, until we walked through the ballroom doors. And Celia turned around, and her heart hit the floor before the glass did. There's a specific kind of silence that follows a public humiliation. It's not loud, not dramatic, not even immediate. It's the kind that stretches between moments, like air being sucked out of a room just before a scream. That's what the ballroom felt like after Celia dropped her glass. Myra's hand was lightly resting on my forearm, her posture immaculate, her expression unreadable. I hadn't even noticed, but she'd guided us directly towards Celia and Terrence, as if we weren't just guests at the party, but gravity itself. I could feel every pair of eyes on us, trailing behind our steps like shadows. Someone coughed. The DJ had seamlessly faded into a low instrumental loop, clearly confused, but professional enough not to kill the vibe completely. Celia's co-workers stood near the appetizer table, unsure whether they were witnessing a breakup, a scandal, or an avant-garde performance. Terrence, my wife's lover, Myra's husband, turned a shade of pale that made his designer tux look too big on him. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then stopped. And in that pause, Mira smiled the way a hunter does when the trap finally closes. "Celia," she said softly, "you didn't tell me it was this kind of party." My wife didn't answer. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Her mascara, which had been impeccable a moment ago, suddenly looked too heavy, like it didn't belong on someone so speechless. I watched her glance between me and Mira, and something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition. Panic. Maybe guilt. But no remorse. Not yet. I stepped closer, just enough for her to smell my cologne. The same one she once said reminded her of Paris, even though we've never been. "You said I didn't like parties," I murmured. "Guess I needed the right date." And Mira? She didn't miss a beat. She leaned in and kissed me on the cheek, deliberately, slowly, while keeping full eye contact with Terrence. The room didn't gasp, but it wanted to. You could feel it. That strange, delicious tension that people love when it isn't happening to them. "You invited us, after all," Mira said sweetly to Terrence. I just assumed the RSVP was implied. He tried to laugh. Actually tried. One of those weak, awkward chuckles you let out when your internal organs are folding. But it died in his throat, and what remained was the look of a man who knew the walls were closing in. "Can we talk?" Celia finally choked out, grabbing at my hand. Too late for that, I replied, gently pulling away, as if her skin might burn me. We didn't cause a scene. We didn't need to. The damage was in the silence. The space between what we knew and what everyone else was starting to realize. People don't forget moments like this. Not because of what's said, but because of what's not. I glanced at the event photographer across the room, already snapping pictures. I sincerely hoped they got a good one. Then Mira took my arm again. And together, we walked away, past the canapes, the stunned HR manager, and the blinking string lights that suddenly seemed too bright. We didn't stop walking until we reached the terrace. The night air hit us like a sigh. I thought I'd feel better, I said quietly, staring out over the city skyline. You will, Mira replied. This was just the appetizer. And she was right. Because the main course? That was still to come. The gala didn't end that night, but something else definitely did. When Mira and I walked out onto the marble terrace, I could still feel the energy humming behind us through the walls. Glass clinks, low murmurs, the awkward shuffle of people trying to pretend they weren't rethinking every moment they'd ever spent with Celia or Terrence. We stood by the railing for a while, letting the cold bite at our skin. The city lights stretched endlessly, like stars had fallen and gotten stuck between buildings. Neither of us spoke for a few minutes. We didn't need to. Eventually, Mira pulled a silver case from her clutch and lit a cigarette with that same calculated grace she did everything with. She didn't even smoke, as she admitted to me earlier. She just liked the way people reacted when she did. Power move, she said. Keeps people off balance. I didn't disagree. Tonight, power was currency, and Mira had it in spades. What do you think they're doing right now? I asked, keeping my eyes on the skyline. Panicking, she said. Trying to figure out if we're bluffing. Or worse, plotting. I let out a humorless chuckle. We're not plotting. No, Mira said, exhaling slowly. We're executing. She flicked the ash from her cigarette and turned to me. You ready for what comes next, Delwin? I nodded too quickly, then caught myself. What is next? That's when her expression changed. Just slightly, but enough to tell me the night wasn't over. Not even close. 10 minutes later, we were walking through the parking lot behind the venue. Mira led the way. I followed, both unsure and exhilarated, like a teenager sneaking out past curfew. She stopped next to a charcoal black Lexus parked awkwardly across two spaces. Terrence's car. I had a key made months ago, Mira said calmly, pulling it from her bag. I didn't ask how. I didn't want to know. She opened the passenger side door like she was getting in to grab a jacket, but instead she reached under the seat and pulled out a small, familiar object. My stomach tightened as she turned and held it up in the faint yellow glow of the parking lot lights. Celia's missing bracelet. Gold. Dainty. Engraved with our wedding date. She hadn't misplaced it after all. Mira looked at me, waiting for the realization to settle in. They've been using his car, I said, my voice sounding far too calm for what I was feeling. Not hotels. Not offices. Just cars and lies. She handed me the bracelet like it was evidence in court. Then she pulled out a manila envelope from her coat and gently placed it on the hood of the car. The word quit was written across the front in thick, red marker. Let's give them something to read on the way home. My throat went dry. What's in that? She just smiled. Screenshots. Photos. A handwritten letter. Oh, and a copy of the message I sent to HR about Celia and her inappropriate relationship with a client executive. You're ruthless, I whispered. I'm precise, she corrected. Before I could respond, I heard the ballroom doors swing open behind us. Footsteps. Quick ones. Then, Delwin, what the hell are you doing? Celia's voice. Sharp. Desperate. I turned slowly, Mira already a step behind me. Celia stood there in her heels and half-destroyed dignity, cheeks flushed, mascara smudged, trying to look composed. But her voice trembled. You left the party without saying anything. Why is her car unlocked? Why are you two back here together? I held up the bracelet. Her eyes locked on it, and widened. Then I said 4 words that would split her down the middle. Found what you lost. And before she could answer, Mira stepped forward. Don't worry, Celia. It'll all make sense by the time you get home. Then we walked away, and left her there, in the parking lot, holding the silence, holding the shame, holding absolutely nothing. 3 days passed before Celia said a single word to me, not for lack of trying. I ignored every call, every message, every voice note that started with Delwin, please, and ended with something along the lines of "We need to talk." I wasn't interested in the remix. I'd already lived the full album. She stayed at her sister's that weekend, or so she claimed in a particularly long email she sent at 2:14 a.m. Subject line, "Closure." I didn't open it. But Monday came, and with it, the consequences. I worked from home, quiet job, coding contracts, nothing glamorous, which meant I was the one who answered the door when the courier arrived. A thick white envelope from Celia's company. No return name, just the corporate logo and a line in the bottom corner that read, "Internal matter, confidential." For a moment, I thought maybe Mira had sent me something extra, another chapter in our unspoken operation. But when I opened it, I realized this one was out of her hands. Inside was a brief statement from HR. It addressed recent allegations regarding employee conduct and confirmed that Celia had been placed under temporary administrative review pending internal investigation. That wasn't the shock. I expected that. What was a surprise was the second document. A formal request from Celia for me to reconsider the content and accuracy of statements shared with third parties. It was subtle, polite, legally sanitized, but it was a threat in lace gloves. She was trying to contain the fallout, control the narrative. Too late. I forwarded the email to Mira, who replied with 2 words, "Let her sweat." That afternoon, Mira and I met again, this time at the fire station. Yes, the fire station. Her cousin, Denny, worked there and had let her borrow a training room for a personal project. She brought coffee. I brought a flash drive. Inside it, backups of every single message, photo, location ping, and timestamp I'd collected over the last 4 months. I'm not a paranoid person by nature, but I learned the hard way that gaslighting makes you either crumble or collect receipts. I chose the latter. We went over everything, building timelines, tracking inconsistencies, finding overlaps and alibis. Mira was surgical, like she'd done this before. She hadn't. But pain has a way of sharpening your instincts. "Did you notice this?" she asked, pointing to a calendar entry that Celia had labeled "Client Strategy Call, Hyatt Boardroom." The timestamp was from a Sunday. There was no call. But that was the same day Terrence had told Mira he was helping his mother move. They were together, she whispered. In a hotel. I finished. We sat there in silence, surrounded by laminated fire safety posters and folding chairs, listening to the sound of the building's pipes humming through the walls. It was absurd, but somehow fitting. We were dousing flames neither of us had set. And then, Mira did something unexpected. She stood up, grabbed a red fire alarm training prop from the corner, held it high, and grinned. "Let's pull it." "What?" Metaphorically, she said. "It's time we stop building our case like lawyers and start burning down their illusions." I laughed. I actually laughed. Maybe from exhaustion. Maybe because I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd buried under polite silence for the last year. Later that night, I got a message from Celia. Just one line. "You told Mira?" No greeting. No punctuation. Just those 3 words like a blade slid under my ribs. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "You handed me the match." She just helped me aim. And then I hit send. Somewhere in this mess, I stopped being the man waiting for closure and became the man writing the final chapter. The difference was subtle, but it smelled a lot like smoke. If you've ever watched someone try to undrown themselves, you'd recognize the desperation I saw in Celia's eyes that Thursday afternoon. She showed up uninvited at the park near our old apartment, the one with the crooked gazebo where we once slow danced after drinking too much sangria. I was there reading a book I didn't even like, just to be somewhere she wouldn't expect. But I guess she knew me better than I thought. She sat down on the bench next to me like it was still hers, like everything still was. She wore sunglasses even though the sky was overcast, and I could see the tight line of stress forming along her jaw. Her nails were painted a different color than usual. It wasn't important, but I noticed. I noticed everything now. "I didn't sleep with him to hurt you," she said finally, voice brittle. There it was, the sentence so many cheaters think is a bomb, not realizing it's just another twist of the knife. I didn't look at her. I just kept my eyes on the page and waited. I could feel her staring at me, waiting for some kind of permission to keep talking. When I didn't give it, she kept going anyway. He was different. I felt seen, like I wasn't just someone's wife or someone's planner. He listened. I closed the book slowly and looked at her, dead in the eye. "So you had lunch with him?" Over and over again. For nearly a year. Her jaw twitched. It wasn't just lunch. I know. I was being kind. She didn't speak, just inhaled sharply like she wanted to cry, but nothing would come out. I waited, and then she said something that genuinely made my stomach flip. He said he was going to leave her for me. And just like that, I saw her. Not the version of her I had loved, or the one I'd mourned, but the hollow one. The woman who gambled a decade of love for whispers in a hotel hallway. She thought she had traded up. She thought there was something more on the other side of our quiet life. But now, with the weight of consequences pressing down, she looked small, shriveled, desperate to grab a parachute while the plane was already in flames. What did he tell you about her? I asked. She blinked. What? Terrence. What did he say about Mira? Celia shrugged slightly. That she was cold, controlling, that they hadn't, in months, that she cared more about appearances than him. I actually smiled, a sad little half-smile that probably made me look insane, because everything she just described was word for word what Mira told me he had said about her. These two had recycled the same script and sold it to their lovers like gospel. They were mirrors, Terrence and Celia, both trying to escape responsibility by projecting it onto their spouses. But the irony? Neither one of us had been anything like what they claimed. Celia reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said, but I need you to read this. It explains things. I didn't take it. You've already explained everything, I said. Every time you met him for lunch, every time you stayed late at work, every time you came home smelling like someone else's cologne, that was your explanation. It wasn't just physical attraction, Delwin. I know. That's the worst part. She finally placed the envelope beside me on the bench and stood up. I'll leave now. Just, please don't drag my name through the mud. Please. I let her walk away without another word. Once she was gone, I didn't touch the envelope. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the group message Mira and I had created with her legal team. Because what Celia didn't know was that Mira had already filed for divorce. And she had named both of them, Terrence and Celia, in her affidavit for infidelity, citing emotional distress and professional misconduct. That envelope, it was already irrelevant. Celia was still playing checkers in a game that had long since turned to chess. And the next move? Mira was already preparing it. A week after the gala, the fire alarm, and the little park bench confession, I found myself standing outside a dimly lit Mediterranean restaurant, my palms sweating like I was about to walk into a hostage negotiation. In a way, I was. Except I wasn't the hostage anymore. I was the guy who used to be tied to the chair, but finally learned how to cut the ropes. Mira had set it up. Every detail. She'd called Terrence and told him she was ready to hear him out. She made it sound like a conversation about forgiveness, about rebuilding. Celia, of course, followed blindly. She always followed the promise of an escape route. Mira told them it would just be the four of us. And she was right. The four of us. But they had no idea what kind of dinner this was going to be. When Mira and I walked in together, the hostess blinked like she wasn't sure if we were a couple or a lawsuit in motion. We were seated before Celia and Terrence arrived. Mira wore a dark green dress that looked both understated and weaponized. She'd always been striking, but tonight she radiated calm power, the kind that people sense before they even look. Are we really doing this? I asked, trying to sound casual, but there was a tightness in my throat. Mira didn't look at me. She unfolded her napkin with precision. They think this is going to be a reconciliation dinner. What they don't realize is that it's a reckoning. 10 minutes later, Celia walked in, Terrence behind her. She looked nervous, like someone expecting a bad performance review, but still hoping for a miracle. Terrence wore his usual smirk, a politician's smile, carefully shaped and utterly hollow. His confidence made my stomach turn. They sat across from us. No one touched the menus. Celia cleared her throat. Thank you both for coming. I know things have escalated, but I think we can all agree that we didn't want this to get so messy. Mira raised an eyebrow. Messy? That's what you're calling it. Terrence jumped in. We're not trying to minimize anything, but we've all been hurt. And if we're being honest, maybe this affair was just a symptom of other problems. Maybe. Don't. I interrupted. Don't you dare try to paint this as some mutual failure. I didn't betray anyone. Mira didn't betray anyone. You two lit the match, and now you're complaining about the smoke. Celia's expression cracked. She opened her mouth, but Mira leaned forward before she could speak. Here's what's going to happen, Mira said calmly. I'm filing for divorce. My lawyers have already contacted your company, Terrence, and submitted the evidence, including documentation that proves Celia's involvement in unethical client engagements. That little trip to Chicago last November? Yeah, the one billed under professional development. We have receipts. Literally. Terrence turned pale. For once, his jaw had no words waiting behind it. And Delwin, Mira continued, turning to me without breaking rhythm, will be seeking a full division of assets. Because while Celia was out looking for someone who sees her, he was the one keeping the roof over her head, the lights on, and the phone bill paid so she could text you. Celia's voice cracked as she whispered, "You said we were going to talk." Mira chuckled. "We are. This is the talk. This is what the truth sounds like. Bitter, isn't it?" For a moment, the table was quiet except for the soft clinking of glasses from nearby diners who had no idea they were sitting next to a four-person implosion. Then I reached into my jacket and slid 2 envelopes across the table. One for Terrence, one for Celia. Terrence stared at his like it was ticking. "Copies," I said, "of everything we've submitted. And a personal note. You'll love the last page." I watched Terrence's hand shake slightly as he tucked the envelope away without opening it. Celia looked like she wanted to vomit, cry, and scream, but all at once and none of it aloud. She knew, deep down, she knew this dinner had never been about rebuilding bridges. It was about letting them burn in front of the architects who designed the disaster. Then Mira picked up her wine, gave a tiny toast, to no one in particular, and said, "Well, now that the business portion of dinner is done, let's order dessert." I'd never seen 2 people look more broken while creme brulee was being served. And for the first time in months, I could taste something other than betrayal. There's something eerie about peace that doesn't belong to you. That morning, I woke up to birds chirping outside my window, soft light pouring in like the world had decided to give me a fresh start. But I didn't feel fresh. I felt hollow. Calm, sure, but not the kind of calm that comes from healing. It was the quiet you hear right before a storm loops back around. The stillness of standing on a battlefield after the gunfire stops, but before you know who's actually won. The dinner with Terrence and Celia had gone exactly as Mira and I planned. The envelopes had been delivered. The lawsuits were officially in motion. Myra's legal team was already working with a journalist to leak details of the scandal. Discreetly, of course, under the guise of a concerned third party inside the company. Terrence's name was being whispered in boardrooms like a contagion, and Celia had already been placed on unpaid leave, pending a comprehensive internal ethics review. It was beautiful, cold, calculated, effective, but that didn't mean it was over. It was around noon when I heard the knock at the door. It wasn't Mira. It wasn't a courier. It was Terrence. I stared through the peephole longer than I should have. He looked nothing like the smug, well-groomed executive who smirked at me across the table at dinner. His tie was crooked, his face blotchy, his suit jacket wrinkled like he'd slept in it. When I opened the door, he didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, breathing like he'd jogged across the city. "I didn't come to fight," he finally said. "I just need to explain something." I should have slammed the door. I didn't. He stepped inside like a man walking into confession. Sat on the edge of my couch like it might disappear under him. "I know you and Mira are running the show now," he said quietly. "And maybe I deserve that. Maybe I deserve all of this." "You do," I said flatly. "But Celia doesn't." That made me blink. "Come again." He looked up, eyes bloodshot. "She didn't know?" "Not really. She thought we had something." I let her believe that. I made promises I never meant to keep. I told her I was leaving Mira, that we'd start over. I lied, Delwin. I told her things just to keep her tethered. Because the truth is, I wasn't going to leave Mira. Ever. For a moment, all the hate I had for him twisted into something worse, understanding. Not sympathy, no, never that, but the grim realization that Celia had been played, too. That didn't excuse her choices, but it reframed them. She had traded her life for a fantasy sold to her by a practiced manipulator. I saw her not as a villain, but a fool who tried to build a new life on the quicksand of someone else's deceit. "She believed you," I said, almost to myself. Terrence nodded slowly. "She did." Silence stretched for a long moment. "I'm not here to beg," he added. "I just thought you should know. She's not doing well. Her sister says she hasn't left the house. Barely eats. Keeps asking what you are going to do next." I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. I was tired. So goddamn tired of being the steady one, the quiet one, the better person. And yet, here I was, letting the man who ruined my marriage sit on my couch like we were trading war stories. When he finally stood to leave, he turned and looked at me with a strange kind of defeat. You win, man. You win everything. And I'm not sure that's a good thing. After he left, I stood in my hallway, stunned, replaying every word. And in that moment, I understood something Mira had hinted at, but never said out loud. Winning doesn't always feel like justice. Sometimes it feels like stepping out of a house you burned down, with no joy, no triumph, just the smell of ash in your clothes and no one left inside. Later that night, I got a call from Mira. No pleasantries, just 2 words. It's done. I asked what she meant. Terrence resigned. Effective immediately. I got the call 20 minutes ago. The board cut ties completely. My breath caught. 1 domino left to fall. And Celia? I asked. There was a pause on the line. She'll find out tomorrow morning. HR's calling her in. Neither of us spoke for a while. There was nothing left to plan, nothing left to prove, just gravity and silence. And for the first time since this all began, I realized that once the fire goes out, you have to figure out what to do with the ashes. 3 months after the dinner, after the resignation, after the HR calls and legal fallout, I found myself sitting on a plane for the first time in almost 4 years. It was early morning, the kind of quiet where even the flight attendants hadn't started their routines yet. The sky outside my window was just beginning to soften, that pale orange bloom of light bleeding into the dark. I'd always loved that part of the day, when everything feels possible again. Mira sat next to me, legs crossed, a novel in her hands. She hadn't said much since we boarded. Not because there was tension, there wasn't, but because silence between us had become something gentle, comfortable, earned. The flight was headed to Lisbon. Neither of us had ever been. The trip wasn't about escape. It wasn't revenge vacation or a symbolic new chapter gesture. It was just a destination, a place to breathe, to remember what it feels like to experience something untouched by betrayal. Back home, everything had settled into its final shape. Terrence had vanished from the company's public listings. Myra's divorce finalized first. She kept the house, most of the assets, and, perhaps most satisfyingly, her name. Celia's proceedings dragged out longer. She didn't fight me legally, not really. A few huffs and paper delays, but ultimately, she signed. She moved out. No dramatic scene, no final confrontation. Just an envelope on the counter with a scribbled line. I'm sorry it took losing everything to see what I had. I never replied. Not because I hated her. Oddly, I didn't anymore. But because some endings don't need last words. Just space, time, distance. And healing? Healing came slowly, like sunlight through frost. At first, it was the small things. Making coffee without wondering what excuse she'd come up with for staying out late. Watching a movie without feeling the pressure of being interesting enough. Breathing in my own home without the stale air of suspicion sitting on my chest. Then came the bigger things. Laughter, sleep, the ability to trust my own thoughts again. And Mira, she never tried to fill a void. She just sat with me while I stitched it shut. We didn't rush anything. No declarations. Just long walks, shared playlists, the occasional inside joke that cracked through the hurt like light through a stained glass window. And now here we were. 2 people who had been lied to, burned, discarded. Now flying above the clouds with nothing tethering us to the wreckage. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like relief. As the plane lifted and the city below disappeared beneath a thin sheet of white, I looked out the window and realized something that almost made me laugh. If Celia hadn't cheated, if Terrence hadn't lied, if I hadn't been humiliated at that gala with half a shrimp skewer in my hand, I never would have made it here. Not just to Lisbon, but to this moment, this version of myself. Stronger, lighter, clearer. I turned to Mira, nudged her arm gently. She looked up from her book. You ever think we're the lucky ones? I asked. She smiled, that calm, knowing smile of hers, and without missing a beat, said, No, I think we're the ones who didn't settle. We clinked our plastic cups of airplane orange juice, and somewhere over the Atlantic, we left our ghosts behind.